The text message arrived at 10:17 on a Tuesday night. I was in my garage, the familiar scent of sawdust and old coffee clinging to the air, meticulously sanding a mahogany desk I'd been restoring for months. Outside, the rain was a steady drumbeat against the windows, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed over the marshlands. My phone screen glowed with 3 words, "Blue Lantern, my place." It was from my daughter, Clara. I stared at the message, the garage light buzzing above my workbench, louder and louder in my ears, not because I didn't understand, but because I understood immediately. 15 minutes later, I was standing in the downpour outside Clara's front door, listening to my 6-year-old granddaughter, Lily, cry inside. And above Lily's soft, broken sobs, I could hear him, Marcus, my son-in-law, shouting, his voice thick with a rage that seemed to consume every frightened soul in that house. In that moment, between the sound of a child's fear and a man's fury, a chilling realization settled over me, one that still wakes me up some nights. This hadn't started tonight. I was just finally arriving in time to see it. My life now, at 68, was a quiet rhythm of restoring furniture, tending my garden, and the occasional phone call from Clara, usually about Lily's latest obsession or school play. Most people in town knew me as Evelyn Reed, a retired widow, a woman who owned too many gardening tools, and one very stubborn basset hound named Buster. Few remembered Major Evelyn Reed. 25 years in Army Special Investigations, 2 tours overseas, enough classified briefings to make ordinary conversation feel painfully slow for the rest of my life. Marcus certainly never cared much about my military background. Early in his marriage to Clara, during a family barbecue, he'd once joked that I was America's most intimidating grandma. Everyone laughed, including me. But over the years, the jokes had shifted, subtly, insidiously. You military types see conspiracies everywhere, don't you? Clara gets so anxious because you raised her to be so cautious. Always said with a charming smile, always delivered in a tone that made challenging him feel unreasonable, like I was overreacting. I picked up my phone and called Clara. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. My chest tightened, making breathing uncomfortable. Blue Lantern. Clara hadn't used those words since she was 12. Her father, my late husband Arthur, had died suddenly from a heart attack the summer before her 7th grade. One minute, Arthur was laughing, grilling burgers, complaining about the local baseball team, and the next, he was collapsing onto the wet grass while our daughter screamed for someone to help him. After the funeral, Clara became terrified of silence, terrified of empty rooms, terrified something terrible could happen while nobody noticed. One night, she asked me a question I never forgot. What if someday I'm scared and can't say it out loud? So we created a code. Blue Lantern. It meant, don't explain, don't waste time, just come. And now, 26 years later, my daughter was using it again. I stood so quickly my chair scraped hard across the garage floor. Buster lifted his head from his bed, sensing the tension immediately. It's okay, boy, I lied, grabbing my truck keys, rain jacket, and phone charger in one motion before heading out into the storm. The rain had gotten heavier. Willow Creek Road gleamed black beneath the streetlights, and my wipers beat a frantic rhythm across the windshield. My mind kept circling backward through small moments I should have paid closer attention to. Clara canceling our weekly dinners more often. Lily growing unusually quiet whenever Marcus entered a room. The way Clara apologized constantly for things that required no apology. At Thanksgiving dinner 2 months earlier, Marcus had corrected the way she carved the turkey in front of everyone at the table. Not loudly, worse than loudly, calmly, patiently, like a father embarrassing a child for misunderstanding something simple. Clara had laughed too quickly afterward. I remembered watching her refill iced tea with trembling hands, while Lily stared silently down at her plate. At the time, I told myself marriages were complicated. Adults argued. Families carried stress differently. The truth was uglier than that. Sometimes people mistake avoiding conflict for protecting peace. I called my old colleague, Frank Miller, while waiting at a red light near Main Street. Frank answered on the second ring, sounding half asleep. Evelyn? She used the code. Silence. That woke him up faster than any coffee ever could. How bad? I didn't know yet. Another pause. Then his voice sharpened. Old instincts sliding back into place. You heading there now? Yes. I'll meet you nearby. Frank had retired from Army CID 5 years ago, though men like him never truly stopped investigating anything. He lived 15 minutes from Clara's subdivision and knew enough about my daughter to understand the seriousness without additional explanation. By the time I crossed into the Riverbend district, rainwater had begun flooding shallow sections along the curb. Expensive brick homes lined quiet streets beneath dripping oak trees. The neighborhood looked exactly like the kind of place Marcus loved. Beautiful from a distance, carefully maintained, every lawn trimmed precisely enough to impress strangers. Clara's porch light glowed pale yellow through the storm. Frank's dark pickup truck sat parked half a block away beneath a large sycamore tree. He climbed into my passenger seat wearing jeans, boots, and an old army rain jacket zipped halfway to his throat. "You armed?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He nodded once. Neither of us spoke for several seconds after that. Then we heard shouting. Even through rain and closed windows, Marcus's voice carried sharply across the street. Something crashed inside the house. Not long after, Lily started crying. Not loud crying, scared crying, the kind children make when they're trying very hard not to be heard. Frank looked toward me carefully. "Want me to call local PD now?" I kept staring at the front door. Kitchen lights burned bright through partially closed blinds. Shadows moved sharply across the walls inside. Then Marcus shouted something that made my stomach turn cold. "You think your mother's going to save you?" I was already opening the truck door before Frank could answer. Rain soaked through my jacket immediately as we crossed the street, fast but controlled. At our age, people don't run unless something is dying. Halfway up the walkway, I noticed Lily's little pink scooter lying sideways near the bushes. One training lesson from years ago flashed through my head unexpectedly. Children abandon toys when fear interrupts routine. By the time I reached the front porch, my heartbeat felt heavy enough to hurt. I opened the door without knocking. The smell hit me first. Whiskey, burnt food, rain blowing through an open kitchen window, somewhere deeper inside the house. Then came the silence. Not true silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that settles over a room immediately after shouting stops. Clara stood near the dining room table, her back to me, her shoulders hunched. Lily was huddled on the floor nearby, clutching a worn teddy bear, her face streaked with tears. Marcus stood across from Clara, a half-empty bottle of bourbon on the table beside him, his eyes red and unfocused. He turned when the door opened, his face a mask of drunken fury. "Evelyn? What the hell are you doing here?" His voice was a snarl. I didn't answer him. My eyes were on Clara. Her hair was disheveled, a bruise blooming on her left arm. She looked up, and for a split second, I saw the terror in her eyes, then a flicker of something else. Relief, perhaps, or a desperate hope. "Lily, come here," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the thick tension. Lily scrambled to her feet and ran to me, burying her face in my leg. I wrapped an arm around her, shielding her. "You think you can just waltz in here?" Marcus slurred, taking a step toward us. "This is my house. My family." Frank stepped in then, his presence a solid wall behind me. "Marcus, I think it's time you calm down." Marcus squinted at Frank, trying to place him. "Who the hell are you?" "An old friend of Evelyn's," Frank said, his voice quiet but firm. "And a former Army CID investigator. I suggest you step away from your wife and daughter." The mention of CID seemed to pierce through Marcus's drunken haze, if only for a moment. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of fear replacing the rage. But then the anger surged back. "You think you can threaten me? This is a domestic dispute, old man. Get out." "This isn't a dispute, Marcus," I said, my voice flat. "This is abuse, and it ends now." I looked at Clara. "Go pack a bag for you and Lily. We're leaving." Clara hesitated, looking from me to Marcus, then back to me. The fear was still there, but something else had ignited in her eyes, a spark of defiance. I can't just leave," she whispered. He'll make it worse." "He won't," I said, meeting her gaze. "Not tonight." "Go." She nodded, a silent promise passing between us. As she moved toward the stairs, Marcus lunged forward, but Frank was quicker, stepping between them, his hand firmly on Marcus's chest, pushing him back. "Don't even think about it." The next hour was a blur. Clara, moving with a strange, numb efficiency, packed a small bag. Lily clung to me, her small body trembling. Marcus alternated between shouting threats and pleading, his words slurring into an incoherent mess. Frank stood guard, a silent, unmoving presence, his eyes missing nothing. Finally, Clara and Lily were in my truck, Lily asleep in the back seat, exhausted from fear. As I started the engine, Marcus stumbled out onto the porch, shouting after us, "You'll regret this, Clara. You'll regret this." Clara didn't look back. She just stared straight ahead, her face pale in the dashboard light, her knuckles white where she gripped her hands in her lap. We drove in silence to my house. The rain had finally begun to ease. Buster met us at the door, sniffing Lily gently, then nudging Clara's hand. I settled Lily into the guest room, then made Clara a cup of chamomile tea. She sat at my kitchen table, her shoulders still hunched, but the tension in her body slowly beginning to recede. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, her voice raw. "You don't have to thank me," I said, sitting across from her. "You just had to ask." "I didn't ask," she corrected, her voice barely audible. "I sent the code." "Same thing," I replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. Her skin was cold. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away, staring out the window at the rain-slicked garden. I was ashamed. He always made me feel like I was overreacting, like it was my fault. He'd be so sorry afterward, so charming, and I'd convince myself it wouldn't happen again. She paused, then added, "And I didn't want to be like Dad. He hated conflict, always just wanted peace." I squeezed her hand. "Sometimes, Clara, avoiding conflict isn't peace, it's just delaying the storm." Over the next few days, Clara slowly began to emerge from the shadow Marcus had cast. She stayed with me, and the quiet rhythm of my home, the simple routines, seemed to soothe her. Lily, initially withdrawn, started playing with Buster again, her laughter a fragile but welcome sound in the house. Marcus, meanwhile, became increasingly unpredictable. One night, he left a voicemail crying, begging Clara to come home. The next morning, he accused her of emotionally kidnapping Lily. Another day, flowers arrived at my front porch with a handwritten note, "I miss my family." 2 hours later, he texted, "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone I know." The emotional whiplash would have been exhausting for anybody. For someone already traumatized, it became disorienting enough to feel almost physically dangerous. Frank stopped by often during that period, never intrusive, just present. Retired investigators understand something younger people sometimes miss. Support doesn't always require speeches. Sometimes it's enough to quietly occupy space beside frightened people until they stop feeling alone. One evening, he sat with me in lawn chairs facing the marsh while Lily chased fireflies across the backyard. "You blaming yourself yet?" he asked without looking at me. "Yes," I admitted. "Good," he said. "Means you're honest." He paused, then his tone softened slightly. "But don't confuse missing signs with causing them." The problem was, I had seen signs. I just softened them into more comfortable explanations. Clara canceling family visits. Lily flinching at sudden noises. Marcus embarrassing Clara publicly in tiny, socially acceptable ways. I remembered a dinner party nearly 8 months earlier where Marcus spent half the evening jokingly correcting Clara's pronunciation of French wines. At the time, I dismissed it as harmless marital banter, a bit of showing off. Now, it felt like a tiny, insidious cut, one of many that had slowly bled her dry. Clara decided to file for divorce. With Frank's help, we found her an excellent lawyer, Sarah Jennings, who specialized in domestic abuse cases. Sarah's approach was firm, compassionate, and strategic. She immediately advised Clara to secure her finances and gather evidence. "People like Marcus build entire identities around appearances," Sarah explained during our first meeting. "Once maintaining that image becomes more important than reality, ethical lines disappear quickly." Sarah's team uncovered a pattern of financial misconduct. Marcus had been submitting false reimbursement requests through his firm for at least 2 years. Luxury hotel charges, restaurant expenses, car services, even jewelry purchases, thousands of dollars. Clara looked pale when she saw the spreadsheets. "He told me we were struggling financially," she whispered. "There's also a leased apartment downtown," Frank added, pointing to a highlighted section. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Not dramatic, just tired. I realized then that somewhere deep down, she'd already known about his infidelity long before any proof appeared. Most spouses do. They simply spend years trying to negotiate emotionally with evidence they don't want confirmed. "When did you first suspect?" I asked quietly. Clara stared out the window toward the marsh. "About a year ago." "Why didn't you confront him?" She laughed softly, without humor. "I did. He convinced me I was paranoid. Then he bought flowers, booked a weekend trip, acted perfect for 3 weeks. That tracked too. Cruel men rarely stay cruel constantly. If they did, leaving would feel simpler. No, the dangerous ones understand timing. Cruelty, affection, humiliation, apology. Repeat long enough, and confusion becomes emotional prison bars." Clara rubbed at her temples slowly. "Sometimes I honestly couldn't tell whether I was overreacting anymore." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "That's intentional. Coercive partners destabilize confidence gradually. The goal isn't just control, it's dependency." I watched my daughter absorb those words carefully, not because they were new, but because hearing somebody else describe her reality made it harder to excuse anymore. Over the next few weeks, small changes began happening almost invisibly. Clara opened her own checking account, changed passwords, started answering calls from old friends she'd slowly disappeared from over the years. One evening, I overheard her laughing on the phone with a former coworker from the elementary school where she used to teach art classes. The sound stopped me cold halfway through the hallway. I honestly couldn't remember the last time I'd heard my daughter laugh naturally. The final confrontation came 6 weeks later. Marcus, facing mounting evidence of his financial fraud, and Clara's unwavering resolve, had agreed to a mediated settlement. It was held at Sarah's office, a sterile room with a large mahogany table that felt more like a battlefield than a negotiation space. Marcus sat across from Clara, his usual charm replaced by a simmering resentment. His lawyer, a sharp, humorless man, did most of the talking. Clara, however, was different. She sat taller, her gaze steady, her voice clear. She no longer flinched when Marcus spoke. She simply listened, then calmly presented her own terms. She wanted full custody of Lily, the house, and a significant portion of his assets to compensate for the years of emotional and financial abuse. Marcus finally broke, his voice rising. "You're ruining me, Clara. You're taking everything." Clara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You took everything from me, Marcus. My peace, my confidence, my trust. You took years from Lily, years she spent listening for your footsteps, afraid." He tried to deflect, to twist the narrative, to turn his failure back at them. "I loved her," Marcus said. Maybe that was true. That's the complicated part nobody wants in revenge stories. Sometimes people cause terrible damage to people they genuinely believe they love. But belief doesn't repair bruises. It doesn't refill stolen accounts. It doesn't give a child back the years she spent listening for footsteps. "You probably did," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the silence. He seemed confused by that. "Then why are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything now," I said. "You turned her against me." "No," I said calmly. "You taught her to be afraid of you. I just helped her remember she didn't have to stay that way." There was another silence, longer this time. Then his voice lowered. "Can you at least tell Lily I'm sorry?" I looked at Clara, who was watching me, her face calm. Earlier that day, Lily had finally learned to ride her bike without training wheels, pedaling furiously down the driveway, Clara clapping from the porch steps. "She's 6, I said to Marcus. "She doesn't need your apology she carried through someone else. She needs you to become the kind of man who understands why she needed safety from you." Marcus said nothing. For once, there was nowhere for his words to go. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." That was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. I looked at Clara then. She must have felt my eyes on her, because she glanced up. Her face changed when she saw the phone at my ear. Not panic, not the old fear. Awareness. I covered the receiver slightly and said, "It's him." Clara looked toward Lily, then toward the marsh, then back at me. After a moment, she shook her head. "Number? One small movement. Complete sentence?" I uncovered the phone. "She doesn't want to talk." Marcus breathed out slowly. "Tell her I loved her." "No," I said. "That's something you won't say for yourself." Then I hung up. My hands were steadier than expected. Clara walked onto the porch beside me after a minute. What did he say? I told her most of it. Not all. Some things don't need to be passed along simply because they were spoken. She listened quietly, arms folded loosely across her chest. When I finished, she nodded once. Then she said, "I don't hate him anymore." That surprised me. Clara noticed and smiled faintly. "I don't forgive him either," she said. "I just don't want to carry him around every day." I looked at my daughter for a long time. There are moments when your children become adults in front of you all over again. Not because they get older, but because they choose peace over proof, distance over drama, a future over the exhausting need to make someone understand the damage they caused. "That sounds healthy," I said. She laughed softly. "Don't sound so shocked." Later that evening, Lily and I sat on the dock eating melting orange popsicles while the sun dropped behind the marsh. Clara had gone inside to take a phone call from Sarah about the final custody agreement. The air smelled like salt-cut grass and gasoline from a boat engine somewhere down the canal. Lily kicked her heels gently against the dockboards. "Grandma." "Yes, baby. Were you a hero in the army?" I smiled at that. 25 years in uniform teaches you many things, but it does not teach you how to answer a child who believes rescue is the same thing as heroism. "No," I said finally. "Not the way you mean." She frowned. "But Mom says you saved us." A breeze moved softly across the water. Somewhere behind us, Buster barked once at absolutely nothing. I thought about Blue Lantern, about Clara's shaking hands around a coffee mug, about Lily's little pink scooter tipped over in the rain, about all the signs I missed because asking harder questions felt intrusive at the time. Heroes aren't always brave people, I told her. Sometimes they're just people who show up when somebody scared asks for help. Lily considered that very seriously, then nodded like I'd handed her important information. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I sat alone on the back porch, with one last cup of coffee cooling beside me. The house behind me was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that hides pain. This quiet felt earned. If this story stays with you, I hope it reminds you to pay attention when someone you love begins disappearing into themselves. Ask the difficult question. Make the phone call. Show up before silence becomes their only way of surviving. And if you've ever had to start over quietly, or if someone once showed up for you when you needed them most, share your thoughts below. Tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes the stories that hurt the most are also the ones that remind us we are not alone. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.